Dr. Rachele Pojednic, welcome back to Conversations in Courage.
So
This is an
long,
honor.
too long.
So long. I can't believe we were just talking. I think it's been 5 years.
5 years.
Easy.
Thank you so much for having me back. I'm thrilled. There's been a lot happening.
Many changes, ma'am, including the fact that I didn't even have a child the last time we talked to you. So this
That's
is
nuts.
truly a lifetime away. We are no longer in lockdown. You no longer live on this side of the country. You no longer are doing what you were doing when we last spoke. So this is really an amazing opportunity to get to circle back to you, to your career, because you are one of those people that you help move us forward in the best way. You literally help us stay healthier and hopefully alive longer and all of the things that we really care about. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for seeing that and for saying it. I feel like I've been screaming into the void for a really long time. And finally, people are getting excited about the things that I do, where before it was kind of like, oh, those are nice to have. And people are starting to realize, no, those are essentials. So I really appreciate it.
So before we get into the nitty gritty, I want to do some quick fire questions. Mark, my love, do you care if I just ask all of these? I don't want to not let you have a voice, but
No, I'm here for it.
okay.
I'm here for it. So
Thank
go.
you. You have plenty of other things to say. Okay. Number 1, what's your go-to hype song?
I lived Artie Remix by Imagine Dragons.
One Republic.
One Republic. Yes, One Republic.
Yes.
Thank you.
That is a good one.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one.
Those lyrics just crush me every single time.
Yep. They are cry-worthy.
But it's got to be the Artie Remix, the original version.
Yes. Agree. One wellness trend that you cannot stand.
NAD infusions.
We're going to get into that. One wellness trend that you absolutely love.
Creatine for women.
Nice.
What is a science fact that blows your mind every single time?
Good one.
Thank you.
I am generally just completely overwhelmed by how cool the human body is. So I'm not sure I can necessarily pinpoint an exact pathway that gets me really excited, but I study muscle. And so one of the things that's just constantly coming up for me is how talkative and communicative and important muscle is. So I think it's kind of this idea of I'm biased, but I'm right. Muscle continues to become obviously the tissue of longevity. And so I'll give that as kind of the blankets science fact.
I will take that. And I know that we'll get to expound on that as we go. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Keep growing. As a scientist, keep asking questions. Never be complacent. Never sort of rest on your heels. There's so much more to learn. And so there's that. And the other thing that has always kept me really motivated is this idea of there's always room at the top, which kind of goes along with the growing element. Is pull people with you, bring them, mention them in a room. And so that growing can happen together.
Yeah. What's a failure that you're quote unquote failure, right? That you're really grateful for?
That is an excellent question. I think I'll bring it back to sort of the science and my career. We'll talk about this in just a second about how I pivoted hard into industry. And I'm not necessarily sure that this was a failure of academia, but more that I recognized where I was going in the wrong direction. And so I was able to really pivot into a new space. And by letting go of what I thought I was doing, really allowed me to grow into this space that I've come into. Otherwise, failures, they happen every day in science, right? You think you have a hypothesis and you're like, oh, this is going to work. And you're like, nope, that was not at all what I was expecting. And so science is just kind of like a continuous falling on your face and failure so that you learn how to ask better questions in the future.
I told you I was going to ask a follow-up. Damn it. I almost made it through the whole list, but I have to ask, does that mean that it doesn't hurt anymore when you fall on your face?
No, it hurts all the time.
Okay.
Even little things I've been speaking a lot lately, and I will come back at the end of the day and I'm like, oh, why did I say it like that?
Mm.
I knew better, or I should have answered different. And so I suffer often from what I call a vulnerability hangover,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
which
yeah.
is whether or not you failed or you just kind of like failed in your own mind because you wanted to do something a little bit differently. It eats at you for a while. And I think that's okay. You learn from it, because if you didn't stumble or you didn't fall flat on your face, you wouldn't know how to do it better the next time. And so I think that's an important life lesson. It's an important science lesson as you're, doing your experiments and thinking about how to do
Right.
things better and differently the next time. And so I think it's okay and important that you fall and fail and reflect on that. And yeah, it stings all the time.
Thank you. I needed to hear I needed to hear you say yes. Okay, last question. What does courage mean to you in this season of your life?
The first thing that came to mind is being open to trying really new things.
Mm.
And in your mid 40s, trying really new things can feel really scary, and it can make you feel very vulnerable, where I had myself grounded in a place that I thought that I was going to be in a really, for the majority of my life moving forward. And then I found myself on the other side of the country in a job that's super new to me, in a job that 5 years ago, Ash and Mark, you would have been like, "You're doing what, Rachel?" And so being really open to trying new things and suffering through that vulnerability hangover, even when you feel like you previously had it all figured out.
That's so cool. That's so
Mark, yeah.
yeah, yeah, I mean, like
I'll let you speak now.
no, 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 this is fantastic, and, like, so many connections. I think, the thing that has always been just exceptionally, cool about you, Rachel, is it's been for me, I'll speak for myself, right? You always motivated a sense of curiosity in us all, because I think the way that you approach the world, you both ask really provocative questions and you provide really provocative context around the answers, right? And I think those are the things that create all kinds of connections. So like the whole pivoting thing and failure thing, like to me, that's all about intersections that inform life. So I just think that's just awesome.
Well, thank you for that. Hopefully the
Good.
provocativeness is helpful moving people forward and not confusing them even more.
It is, it
Mhm.
is.
It is definitely.
All right, so Mark, why don't you kick us off, since you graciously allowed me to take that first section to just have some time to myself with Rachel.
No, this is fantastic. I mean, I think it would be great, right, for the listeners just to understand as well as us, like the general origin story. Like, how did you come about to want to do this, right, for your life, right, to study, the body at such a foundational level, right? You're
Yeah.
fascinated by just how the body works, and most of us are very superficial, and you are definitely not superficial. So, maybe help us understand that a bit.
Yeah, sure. So I started out way back in the day in Boston, came to Boston from a little farm town in the middle of Massachusetts. I'm a first generation college kid.
Wow.
And I didn't really know what I wanted to study. So I studied something that I thought was fun, which was exercise science. And it really started getting me thinking about what the body does, how to optimize, essentially, before that was a hot term way back in the day. And it got me really thinking about how powerful these lifestyle behaviors are, right? And so when my education started to progress, I did some teaching early on. I did some coaching. I was a strength and conditioning coach. I was a personal trainer. That's how I got through undergrad, paying for my tuition. It started to become really clear that this was just a place of passion for me, but also a place of really deep science that wasn't really tapped into yet.
Yeah.
And fast forward several years, I have a PhD in nutritional biochemistry, and I tie that into exercise physiology. So I have this Venn diagram in my head of how movement and fueling intersect with each other. And for the longest time, people were kind of like, oh, that's soft science. Is it really that important? Is it only important for athletes? And now, kind of full circle here, 25 years later, people are thinking about how they can move their body and fuel their body, not only for health right now, but also for healthy aging. Make the joke often that I've been studying longevity way before it was cool. And, back in the day, people were asking me, why are you studying people that are 80 years old, that are 100 years old? And I was like, well, because if you think about studying people that are 80 or 100, and then at the time I was also studying athletes, war fighters, high performers, you can essentially start to look at this arc of aging and of optimization, another buzzword these days, right? Where you can see, okay, when everything is going really well, you've got a young 20-year-old, everything is, strong and robust, and they're fueling and they're exercising and they're kind of at their peak of health. And then you start to fast forward up to 80 or 90 or 100, and you start to view that arc. You can see where things start to break down. And if you can see where things start to break down, you can see places or inflection points where you can intervene, whether it's food, whether it's supplementation, whether it's exercise. I pal around with a bunch of people that study what's called lifestyle medicine. So they're looking at sleep and stress reduction and human connection. And all of these kind of soft things that people were for the longest time thinking, those are nice to haves, we're now recognizing as critical foundations to healthy aging and how to keep people well for the long term.
I love this so much. I'm going to actually pivot to a related question. So you talk about this Venn around nutrition and movement. And is there another part of the Venn around mindset that helps with this? And then very specifically, when I think about aging, right? Growing up, the stereotypes is this is the season to slow down, to lean in. And we all were fed that diet. And to me, that's immensely dangerous, right? And I feel like there's a mindset component here, especially as we age, that balances it out. I mean, I would love your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that in two parts. I'm going to start with putting people in a rocking chair when they get old. If you were to talk to exercise people, even 20, 25 years ago, looking at, oh, you should slow down, be really careful, don't move your body as you get older, we were all like, that's the literal worst idea I've ever heard in my life. Please don't do that. Because the second you stop moving, the use it or lose it principle kicks in, right? And so if you are from the exercise world, we had all said for the longest time, please don't put grandma in a rocking chair watching Jeopardy all day. It's literally the worst thing that you can do. And
Right.
there were societies that showed that that was true. So, really hot right now is the Blue Zone, documentaries and everything else. And, they're talking about how, you know, people just continuously move as they get older. And that's one of the pillars that keeps them healthy for the long term. And so it's kind of played out in population level data and also in the exercise data. And now finally people are saying, like, keep moving, whether it's
Right.
walking or resistance training. When I was at Tufts, I was in the nutrition, exercise physiology, and sarcopenia lab. And the NEPS lab for short. And we used to bring people in that were 80, 90, 100 years old. And we used to power train them, like moving heavy things fast. And everybody was like, that sounds like a really bad idea. And as it turns out, it's the best thing that we possibly could have done
Oh,
for
that's awesome.
people.
Yeah.
And just to put a little bow on this, it's never too late, right? So you can start doing this. If you have been injured or sedentary, or it's never really been a part of your life, you can start moving right up until the last part here, right? And then the other part, coming back to the Venn diagram of all the pieces. So in half my life, I'm sure we'll get to this now, I'm in industry. Now I'm the chief science officer for a company called Restore. In the other half of my life, I am faculty at Stanford, and I am the director of education for a group called Stanford Lifestyle Medicine. And these are the people that I'm palling around with that I was talking about just a second ago that are into sleep and stress reduction and social connection. And so we have 7 pillars at Stanford Lifestyle Medicine. And it's funny, if you were to look at all of the faculty that come in, there's 40 or 50 of us. We meet weekly, and every pillar has what we call a pillar head. And if you were to ask the pillar heads to put one PowerPoint slide up about their pillar that's the most important, I can guarantee that every single one of them would give you a graph that shows how their pillar is so much more beneficial for health and longevity than everybody else, right? So I would put my exercise one up and I'd show how cardiorespiratory fitness is so much more important than, smoking and diet and everything. And the one that always gets me, to your point, Mark, is the social connection people, right? Is they come in and they show loneliness and not having people relationships, not having in real life relationships is so detrimental to overall health and longevity. People die earlier, they die sicker. And so I think all of these components of the Venn diagram are super important, but you bring one up that I just think is so critical is this idea of, what's going on emotionally, whether it's mindset, whether it's having relationships with other people. And you can tie that to everything else, right? So, like eating dinner around a table with your family is so powerful and potent, and the research is starting to show that. Exercise is when done in a group is so motivating to people because they want to be around others that are like-minded and they push each other.
Yeah.
All of these things are connected with each other. And so that's why the Venn diagram analogy is so great because they're also intertwined.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that too. Heard you say like 25 years ago, and I can't help but also just for anyone listening who is building something or collaborating on something of, we definitely live in a very fast, very convenience-based culture. But when you are building a career, especially one based in science where you're using like human bodies as like a part of the research, right? Like nothing meaningful comes quickly. And you've said just even a couple of times since we've been on this call that certain things are just now becoming popular, or you've been speaking a lot lately, or a lot of people want to talk about XYZ lately, which is so, so great. And also, you've had to really stay in it. Even though you've pivoted, you've had to like really trust that like it was somehow going to work out. Now, whether maybe you didn't know that you would become this like public figure, but there had to be some part of you that just like believed that like this was the thing, right? So how did you come to know that your superpower was in translating science for everyday people like us who are not scientists?
I so appreciate you saying that, Ash, from two different angles. The first is you just saying you've been doing this for 25 years, even though it just came out of my mouth, just kind of like hit me in a really different way for you to say, like, you have actually been working at this for 25 years. Given how fast paced everything feels right now, I constantly feel like head on a swivel, like I've got to think about this and I've got to think about that. The grounding of the 25 years feels really good. Thank you for saying that. Like, it actually has taken a really long time to gather expertise in this space, to think about how to communicate all of this really complicated science in a way that people can understand. And then the second part is I'm so glad that it's coming across the way that I'm hoping and that the communication is actually quite useful for people, because I think in the worlds that I live in, it was either way back in the day really specific to high performers, mostly athletes, right? These are the people that access this kind of information. It wasn't applied to the general population.
Right.
Or kind of like niche groups, right? So like the biohackers back in the day were basically the bodybuilders, right? And they have still this, sort of like secret club where they're experimenting on their bodies all the time and they're trying to do all kinds of different things. But 25 years ago, that was kind of the two groups that my world was talking to. And so it was really obvious to me at the time, and it has become so much more clear, I think, to most people, that these principles apply to all of us, and that we all have bodies that are capable of doing amazing things. And how do we encourage those amazing things to happen, but also take on different lifestyles or behaviors or actions to make sure that in that arc, we are not degenerating early. And so I think as we
It's okay. We have pets. You know that.
my dog in the background, yes. Apparently
It's
they're
fine.
talking together. It's funny, I was thinking about the intro that you used to have, and I don't know if you still use it. That was
No, we
we're the
don't.
dishwasher or the
Yes.
dog. Yeah. Yep.
Because it's so real.
Yep.
It's just too real.
So real. So anyways, back to this idea of, we all have these bodies that we need to take care of. And it does feel really exciting to be on the leading edge of that after giving it 25 years of good, solid work and figuring out how to make all of this relevant to everyday people.
Right. Right. To that end, if we could Mark, if you don't mind, and just Mark, take us like backwards if I'm like moving too far ahead. In terms of like everyday kind of stuff, what are we not understanding about a couple of things? One, muscle and the role of muscle, and why are we hearing like all of this stuff around like protein, and why do we have to like strive for these grams every day? And then similarly, what do we not understand about metabolism and how it all kind of fits together? Like, what's the point of all of this shit that I think taking care of yourself has become a full-time job in 2025. It's become expensive, and it's become something where I don't consider myself disordered in any means, but it occupies probably as much space as parenting does. And because I want to live long and I want to live well. So, what should we be thinking about?
I think one of the things that you just said to me that's so important to recognize is that wellness has become kind of all encompassing in people's brain. And the other thing that you just said that really like makes my like it grinds my gears is that it's expensive, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
don't think any of the big levers that we have to pull need to either be all consuming or expensive. And so if
Wow.
you think about the big levers, and these are the ones that if you want to live well and live well long, these are the ones that you need to be focusing on. Moving your body. We can talk
Okay.
about the intricacies of that. Eating a healthy diet, and healthy has a spectrum, right?
Mhm.
It could be vegan, it could be omnivorous, it could be somewhere in the middle. Having people around you in relationship, going to sleep, right? That one is challenging, but not necessarily expensive.
Yeah.
And finding ways to de-stress. If you can pull those levers daily without having to create a tincture or a potion or a fucking protocol, like they should just come naturally in your
Mm.
Oh,
day.
shit.
Yeah.
Should they?
Without having to feel like you need to put a ton of external stress inducing effort into it, because that becomes its own vicious cycle, right?
Right.
So you and I have done a lot of work with Lululemon way back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
They'll pal around these groups, and they released a report, I think it was probably about a year ago, that basically showed that people's mental health was deteriorating because they were so obsessed with wellness.
Hmm.
And it was, as you are saying, so all consuming in their day to day that
Mhm.
they were freaking out if I didn't get enough protein, if I didn't do, you know, my heart rate didn't get to such and such a beat per minute with my hit or sit or
Right.
zone 2 training, that I am not journaling enough, or my sleep hygiene routine isn't adequate. Like, is my room temperature appropriate? Do I have the right sheets? And that's where shit becomes like stupid and
Yeah.
expensive, right?
Yeah.
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 And so, yes, there are things that we need to be concerned about in our environment that we probably want to be paying attention to. But if we are constantly going down rabbit holes, in the end, what you're actually doing is engaging your stress response in such a highly inflammatory way that you're probably undoing a lot of the good that you're trying to do in the rest of your day, because you're just so caught up in the dumb minutia. So
Yeah.
I'll give you
Yeah.
a really good example. I posted
Yeah.
on my LinkedIn, and we were talking about this a second ago, Mark, the study that came out of Sydney, Australia, University of Sydney. And these kinds of studies come out in the exercise world really often. And I'll pivot it back to muscle, Ashley, in just a second. So this study came out, huge cohort of people, 75,000 some odd people. And what they did was this big population study to figure out what kind of exercise was most beneficial for keeping people healthy in the long term. So they looked at diseases like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, cancer, the stuff that's going to get us in the end. And what they determined was that vigorous activity was the most beneficial, and also that you could do less of it. So that was kind of the take home, right? Was vigorous exercise in smaller doses seemed to be more effective than moderate exercise or low intensity exercise. But if you actually dug below the headlines, and this is what I was trying to get into with my LinkedIn post, is that doesn't mean that moderate exercise doesn't count or that it's not good. It just means if you want the same physiologic benefit, you got to do it for a little bit longer. And if you want to go for a walk because that's what's like your jam right now, awesome, really good for health and longevity, probably not going to help you run a marathon, right? And so this is the kind of context and nuance that matters, because what many people took away from that headline was like, either awesome, I can do short amounts of vigorous exercise and live forever, which is kind of not what people were saying. But the other part of it that was really stressful for people is, what if I don't like vigorous exercise? What if I don't want to do that high intensity work? Am I screwed? And the answer was no. Like,
No.
do what you love. And I will die on this hill if you don't find the exercise that you love. And I would apply this to the diet that works best for you, the social connections that works best for you, the sleep hygiene routine that works best for you. If you can't find the thing that's sustainable for you, you're not going to stick with it. And if you're not going to stick with it, the vicious cycle starts right then and there, because the guilt begins, Ashley. The digging down rabbit holes begins, because it's like, well, this person does that and this person does that. Find the thing that's right for you and for your body and for your life. And then it doesn't become this all-consuming journey, like slog, like battle, right? Because if you do and you pull these levers in the way that works for you and for your body, that is going to have the biggest impact long term.
Okay.
And so this comes to, I'll pivot it back to muscle for just a quick second. So this comes back to this idea of muscle, right? So this is the tissue that I've been studying for 25 years, and I can go into the weeds with you on type 1 fibers, type 2 fibers, mitochondrial density, mitochondrial efficiency, metabolic flexibility, right? At the end of the day, you know what matters most? That you have muscle and that you're able to use it. I can show you a study that says that push-ups are the number one indicator of longevity. I just told you about a study that showed that vigorous exercise is the number one indicator of longevity. Everybody's talking about zone 2 and how you got to get on that bike and barely pedal. And that's the take home message here is move your damn body. Move your body. If you're moving your body, you will have health and you will have longevity. If you want to run a marathon, train to run a marathon. If you want to lift really heavy things, train to lift really heavy things. That's the nuance there is goals outside of health and longevity, and there are strategies that you would use to achieve those goals. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about muscle, you need it. You probably need a lot of it, and you want to keep stimulating it for your entire life.
Okay. So we are essentially overcomplicating.
Yes.
But also in some ways, like, not our fault, because there's so much information and there's so much fear mongering, and there's study after study after study where you're kind of looking for one answer or just for at least the answers to be something manageable, where of course we're going to be kind of going nuts because we're not scientists and we're, looking at a quick post or a headline, and then we have to move on to the next thing that's perhaps our actual job. And so you just kind of walk away with, oh, shit, I'm not doing enough. Or, oh, shit, my husband's not doing enough. I have to tell him that he needs to start doing da 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 da, right? Like, and so it occupies too much space, and you're trying to just figure out, as everyone around you is like, diseased or dying younger or whatever, you're like, how can this not be me? As my child eats nothing but fucking crackers and pirate's booty, I'm like, oh my God, great. He's going to have like no bone density because he's not eating anything that's going to actually help him. But you know what I mean? Like, you kind of just go nuts.
So 2 things. I'll start with the kid and the Lucky Charms. We all survived on Lucky Charms. Like, we're going to be okay, right?
And disgusting Chef Boyardee.
Come on.
I know Mark loves grape nuts. It's disgusting.
The good thing is, so one thing that I will just offer as a bit of a solve and a grounding is that your body, as I mentioned just a moment ago, is always going to be dynamic and it's always going to be flexible. And there's always going to be opportunity to right the ship if things start to go sideways. You can think about this in context of you had to have a surgery or you have an injury or you have some life event that happens that you just can't pay attention to your body in the way that you would otherwise do. Those are all recoverable events, right? And recovery is going to come across in many different ways for many different people, but your body is always going to be able to adapt, which is one of the most amazing things about the human body, I think, is that there is this never-ending do-over that you have the ability to engage in.
Hmm.
So I will say, let Zion have his pirate's booty as long as you try and, get some other things that he likes over the
We are
time,
trying.
but
We are
don't
trying.
stress yourself out over it. Um, and then the other piece here is something that it's a needle that I try to thread every single day. Because when I say something like, just move your body, that's the thing that you need to pay attention to. If you like to practice yoga, if you like to go to Pilates, if you like to go for a walk, that is the biggest lever. And then people are like, well, but go deeper, Rachel. Like, tell me what
Mhm.
do I actually
Mhm.
need to do?
Mhm.
Right. And so this is the needle that I'm constantly trying to thread with people is this is the big concept, and this is potentially how it could apply to you and to your life, right? So let's say I'm talking to somebody that is a runner and they love running and they say to me, Rachel, should I start doing some strength training? I'd say, yeah, you should probably start doing some strength training. And they start doing strength training and they're like, I hate this. Like, I hate how this makes my body feel. I don't want to lift heavy. It's just not in my nature to do this. I'd be like, fine, don't. Like,
Right.
going to be all right. Keep running. You're going to be great. Right. And then I might talk to a runner that's like, oh man, resistance training is changing everything for me. Like I'm faster. I'm more powerful. I have this great, like that's awesome for you. But your goal at the end of the day is running, right? Like that's your thing. And so the program that I might put together for you is going to be different depending on how your body feels, depending on if you live in Colorado or you live in San Diego. And so this is the part that's so hard with people is everybody wants the right answer
Yeah.
and the
Yes.
only answer really and truly is the right answer for you, right? And so this is the part that I think people get so caught up with is there has to be a protocol and I have to follow this protocol and this is the right protocol.
Oh,
There is no such thing. There is no such thing. And I'll take it one step further. Even within that individual, those protocols are going to change throughout the lifespan. Think about yourself when you were 20 years old.
I couldn't do that shit now.
You were a different human being when you were
Totally.
20 years old. And it might be that your 20-year-old self was like in an apartment or a dorm room, putting back that pirate's booty, playing video games, and like, or it could be that person that was just like hustling, like slamming
yeah.
hard in the gym, like you were going big, you were taking all the, supplements and the creatines and everything else. In your 40s, you are a different human. In your
Right.
60s, you are a different human. In your 80s, you are a different human. And if you think that that protocol is going to apply to each of those stages of life, I am here to tell you something. You are absolutely wrong. And so that is something that we have to think about here. And this is where the science communication gets really tricky is there actually is no right answer. There is a right answer for you right now in your life? And how do we get you to uncover that? Number one. But number
Mhm.
two, how do we get you to actually implement it so that Ashley, you aren't spending a bajillion dollars going down, crazy supplement protocols,
Right.
features, tips, classes, whatever. And also driving yourself bonkers because you're not actually hitting this protocol. And I think about this a lot with this whole idea of this heavy air quoting now protocols, which is such a hot word right now, is I honestly think they're totally self-defeating because the second that you stop engaging in that protocol, you start to feel bad about yourself.
Yeah.
Second, you start to feel bad about yourself, you're either probably going to go one way too hard or the other, where you're going to get back into it and you're just going to crush yourself, which is not going to work out well in the end. Or you're going to be like, fuck it. Like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
And you start to feel really bad about yourself. And so I think you're asking such an important question, which is just tell me what to do. And I I can't. And the reason that I can't is because Mark is different than Ashley, is different than Rachel, is different than every other person that's listening from this podcast. And I can give you the general principles, and then we can figure out how they work in your day to day and in your life. And
Yeah.
that's the right answer.
Rachel, I like,
I love that.
you always do this, right? I mean,
Thank you.
you create this space where like a billion new connections form. I listen to you talk about, this, and I think that's a prescription for so many parts of life. If we think
Mhm.
about organizations, right? How many books are there in terms of how to run a perfect organization? And tomorrow there will be a new book, but there are foundational principles that will always be true. And if you understand the foundations, and if you understand
Mhm.
what season of life you're in, a
Mhm.
startup, a scale up, a mature organization, they apply. What's the culture like? Like, all of these things matter. And when I play back what you're saying, it does go back to like understand the foundations, be curious, right? Interrogate what you're reading, what you're seeing, like, and how does it work in your body, specifically in your season of life. And I'm going to now connect the dot to something I think semi-related. So when I think about us each interrogating our own selves, the idea of intuition, right, comes up. So has there been a time in your life, or maybe, how do you think about where science stops and intuition or lived experience, maybe is the right question, picks up,
Interesting.
right? Because I also have to believe that that needs to be part of the equation when you're figuring out what right looks like.
I think you're totally bang on, Mark. And I have to admit, I am not a cognitive brain mindset kind of scientist. So my foundational knowledge is personal in this sense, right? So this is just Rachel Pojednic talking.
I love
And it
this.
comes back to, Ashley, your question that you asked just a few minutes ago, which was, like, how did you know that this was so important to just keep going in? And that was my intuition, is the
Mm.
science was not quite there yet for the general population, but I was like, this is important. I am certain that this is key and critical. And although I don't know where physiologically or maybe sort of like universally that intuition, where that comes from, I think that is something that is so basically human. It's what defines humanity from other species on the planet, is that we have this emotion, we have free will, we have influence over one another, and that plays a huge part in the way that we visualize the world, the way that we think about the environment around us, the social connections that we make, the support systems that we put into place. And so I think that's a critical element here that maybe I should add to my Venn diagram, is that I call Katie Mackin up and see what
I know.
the astrological signs of intuition say at this point.
Totally.
But a really good and interesting example of this that is emerging in the exercise literature right now, as well as in the behavioral health literature, is that people are starting to recognize how powerful being out in nature is. And it kind of goes to what you're getting at, Mark, a little bit, is it combines a lot of these elements that we're talking about. It's the movement, it's the deep breathing, potentially it's being alone or with a partner that you're kind of walking and talking with. But there's something really powerful to the human body, to the human psyche, of being in nature. And nobody's really able to kind of dig out what the
Yeah.
exact physiologic mechanism is. We just know it's really good. And so I think that kind of aligns, if I'm going to dig into the science a little bit of what you're talking about, is for whatever reason, going for a walk in the woods seems to be a really powerful and potent lever to pull. And there's a lot to discover there, which is pretty exciting about thinking about where that science could potentially go to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mark, I love that you asked that, because I think, and you can attest to this since you live with all of this beautiful, crazy every day of your life. Rach, do you know our 5-year wedding anniversary is next week?
Oh my goodness, happy
Yeah. Thank you.
anniversary.
Isn't
That's
that
so
cute?
exciting.
Yeah,
Adorable.
I can't
Rachel.
even. Um,
I
it
can
all
picture
started on
I
a
can
bike.
picture the picture of the two of you the day that you got
Oh,
married.
yeah.
Wow.
Thank you. Yeah, our little like pandemic wedding.
Yeah.
Um, No, because, the connection that I make in my brain and where I think I get into the weeds is like my intuition. I've worked really, really hard to cultivate a sort of being able to listen to myself and to be able to separate what my voice is and what my voice is right now and what might be like a previous version of me or what might be coming from my upbringing or my haters or whatever it is, right?
You don't have
And
any
I
fears, Ash.
you're right. We'll go with that. And I think that like that is for me, like when it comes to specifically wellness, I think my instincts are spot on because, and Mark, you know this, because when I listen to what I need,
Mm,
regardless of what I've planned for the week, right? So I might say like Monday is a lifting day, Wednesday is a lifting day, but I might get to Wednesday, be like, actually, it's a Pilates day. And if I actually listen to myself, I feel incredible and I feel in flow with myself. But then if I listen to the wellness world, it's like, no, Wednesday's a lifting day and you have X amount of time per week. And if you miss this window, then you're not getting it back. And then your load for the week is off. And then like, it's going to have this whole effect, which, sort of in my brain, which doesn't often happen. Sometimes it does, but my brain, it's like if you don't follow the routine, then you're going to get too far off
and-
track and then you're going to mess up everything that you've built. And honestly, sometimes that does happen. Like sometimes I go too far into, whatever. Like it would just feel good to watch Grey's Anatomy today. And then I do that too much and I have to pull myself back. So it's true. It does happen. But I definitely over catastrophize it because uh, because of wellness, because like the dark side of this industry that I still work in the fitness capacity is that there is very much a right and a wrong and you can't trust yourself. Like the sort of like sense of self almost doesn't have a place in the machine. And I think like that's what I'm getting at. I don't think it's a question. I guess I just appreciate that Mark brought that in and that you also pulled that into what it means for you because it's a very important part of how I live. And when I let other things get in the way of that, then it just completely pulls me out of alignment with myself and with my body ultimately.
I think you're making a super important point where right now this kind of has shades of gray, but a lot of people are leaning hard into what does the science say, right?
yeah,
And what is the scientific literature? What is the scientific evidence? The first thing that I'll say is that science is constantly evolving. There are some foundational principles, but we're always learning more. And that's the whole idea, right? So the right answer that we have today is based on the knowledge that we have today, and that will evolve and change. And there's also a whole other world out there of philosophy, of art, of the elements that are not quantifiable in the way that I do science is. I can tell you changes in, cytokine pathways, myokine pathways in your muscle. I can talk to you about metabolism and your A1C and how that's changing. And I can't put a scientific measure on why I get goosebumps when I hear I Lived Artie remix every single time. Every single time. I can put that on as a closer in my spin class and on the instructor bike, I like eyes tearing up, right? Like,
Yeah.
why does that happen to me every single time? I don't know. I don't know. And that's again, it's part of being human is this
Yeah.
intuition, this like internal feeling that I, as a scientist, am never going to be able to quantify. And yet we recognize how critical and important it is. Like, wouldn't life be horrific without philosophers and in depth emotional conversations and beautiful art to look at and experience and goosebumps from certain music that just hits you in the right chord? And I think these two things, my life, Mark, exists in Venn diagrams, right? Like these two things are both essential to life, right? Like we do want to understand those deep pathways, and and maybe in the context of why my brain goes a certain way when I hear a certain piece of music. But I see us all living right in the middle of those two
Mm,
circles where we
mm,
need both
mm.
of those things in order to be healthy, happy, whole humans. And that is what makes us human at the end of the day. And so paying attention to that intuition is super important. And I will also offer it's important, as science does, to change that intuition over time, right? Like your intuition
Yeah.
at almost 40 is probably really different than it was at about the age of 20, right? Like you have much more wisdom, you have much more experience, you have much more lived day to day where you can say, that fell on my face 10 times doing that, not going to do it again, even though my gut really says I want to sit on the couch and watch Grey's Anatomy all day, right? But like I know that that's not going to be the good thing for me, at least for the long term.
Right.
And so I think that those two things go together where it's how can we change and listen to our physiology, but also how can we change and listen to our changing intuition over
Mm,
time in life? And I'll actually tap into you sort of talked about the dark space of wellness right now. It made me think about all of the wearables that we have in this
Yeah.
moment.
yes. Yes, ma'am. Can't live
Yeah, I
without
can
them.
see it. Yeah. Yeah. I have to be, I am analog. I went back,
Yeah.
Yes.
everything off, took everything off because as we're looking at the science of these wearables, they can be really helpful for structure. I'm a scientist, a straight line spreadsheet thinker. I love numbers. I love to see, data over time. And for me, for my intuition, for my mental health, it was a bad thing after a
Mhm,
while.
mhm.
Full disclosure, I should probably pal around with my sleep people a little bit more. I'm a terrible sleeper. I'm a really, really bad
No way.
sleeper. Oh, horrible. And I would wake up in the morning and I was wearing an Aura ring at the time. And it would basically be like, you slept like holy hell. And I was like, I'm aware. Thank you. I know. And what it would do is it would start pinging me, right? At like 8 o'clock at night. It's time to start going to bed, like get yourself going and like make sure that you're doing these things. And it was giving me massive anxiety before I went to bed because I was like, I'm doing all the things. I took the hot shower. I took my magnesium. I am reading a book with pages and I still wake up at 3 in the morning with my brain racing. It's just the way that I'm wired. And honestly, working with a couple of people and then saying like, Rachel, it's okay. Just like be awake at 3 a.m. and eventually you will fall back to sleep without like churning. And I have a couple of tools that I use at 3 a.m. But that device was so problematic and put me into that vicious cycle that the best thing for me was to take it off and to not be a quantified person 24/7. Because as you were talking about, earlier and sort of throughout, Ashley, like I was going down rabbit holes of like, what's wrong with me? Why is this happening? What can
Right.
I do to improve it? And here's something that's really interesting. So one of the major things that our wearables are giving us right now is something called HRV, right? So this
Mhm.
is heart rate variability. And essentially, a higher heart rate variability is supposed to be better than a lower heart rate variability. And this number actually is derived 20, 30 years ago now, from looking at fetal hearts and maternal hearts. And they were able to really understand if the fetus was in a good shape, if the pregnancy was going well. And so heart rate variability is essentially the distance of time in between each of your heartbeats. So you actually want it to be quite variable. You don't want it to be perfectly spaced out. And subsequently to the fetal heartbeat and the maternal heartbeat story, they figured out that this was the lower the HRV, the increased risk of cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular events. And so that's all it was for 20, 25 years. And then all of a sudden, you get these companies that are like, oh, no, this is about recovery.
Huh.
And they started saying, oh, we're going to put a watch on or a strap on everybody or put a ring on everybody or, put a watch on everybody and we're going to start measuring this. And the interesting thing is if you actually talked to the brain health people, they were like, no, if this is actually indicating recovery. And what I was just at a conference the other day, I was talking to a whole bunch of brain health people and they were like, what it does is it basically indicates to you what happened in the last 24 to 48 hours or so from like a stress situation in your body. So
Okay.
the first thing that's really important to know about HRV is it's backwards looking. The second thing that's really interesting is when I first started using this data in my research, which I do, I use HRV. One of the things that came up, I was looking at war fighters at the time, and there was a series of studies that actually showed that fighter pilots that were going out on a training mission actually performed better if their HRV was lower the morning that they went out on their
Interesting.
event or on their training mission, excuse me. And when I talked to the brain health people, they were like, yeah, obviously, stress focuses you. And so if you are seeing your stress and you're recognizing and acknowledging your stress, it's going to basically tunnel vision you in the sense of if I'm going up in a, $20 million plane and I want to make sure I'm doing these maneuvers well, you're going to be hyper focused. I like to think about it as butterflies flying in formation, right? So you've got this stress response, but you know what to do with it. Interestingly, the fighter pilots that didn't have an HRV response, their HRV was pretty high that morning, were performing less well on these maneuvers because they weren't as dialed in, as focused. Fast forward to 2025, and we're telling athletes, for example, you wake up in the morning and your HRV is low, and on your app it says, you should probably take an easy day today. Like, take it easy. Something's stressing you out. Imagine, and I work with athletes like this that get that message the morning of their national championship or the morning of their Olympic final. And they've got this metric that's probably not indicating to them what they think it is. It's telling them you're stressed, you're focused, maybe even you're ready. And what they're now mentally thinking is, oh shit, like my HRV has tanked. What did I do? Did I not eat well? Did I not sleep well? Here's the really interesting thing. There is not a single study that is out there. And I'm not saying that it's going to work in one way or the other, but there's not a single study out there that has ever looked at human performance after a lowering of HRV in the acute sense. In meaning that if you wake up in the morning and your HRV is low and then you go do the thing that you needed to do, you compete, you go to work, you present at a conference, whatever, that has been impaired by that acute response of HRV. And yet all of us are walking around with these straps and watches being like, shit, my app this morning says that I need to take it easy. Think about what that does to you mentally. You're not going to show up. You're not going to be prepared. You're not going to be at your best at your game because this metric that probably isn't indicating to you what you think it is priming you to behave in a certain way.
Oh, I love this because this
pretty,
wait, Mark, let me go first just because.
Go.
Well, this is why I stopped wearing a Whoop during pregnancy because it was telling me things that didn't make sense. And I've like had conversations with people. I know the technology has changed, but I did not change my opinion. I was like, I'm never going back to this. But this reminds me very much of I just finished reading The Mindful Body by Dr. Ellen Langer, and she talks about basically like how your brain influences, right? Like everything else, like you could be totally fine, but you see this data and then you spin yourself into the very thing that you don't want to be. And that's the part that I kind of find fascinating about this whole thing is that like you end up telling yourself a story that isn't true and then your body acts it out. Like that's kind of incredible science, but also terrifying.
Yep. Ellen Langer is one of my favorite scientists in that space,
She's
in the
super
mindset
dope.
space. She's amazing. And her student is actually a colleague of mine now at Stanford. Her name is Allie Crum. She
Amazing.
runs the Mind Body Lab out here. And Allie and one of her postdocs did this really cool study where they took Apple Watches with people and they gave them to them for 5 weeks. The first week, if you've ever had an Apple Watch, you know that like it tells you the time, it tells you the temperature, and then it also has a step count that you can set in the front stage. And so in the step count, the first week that they got it, they just got the like, calibrating wheel for the whole week. And they figured out while they were calibrating what the average step count is for each of the participants. And then what they did was they actually took this group of people and they told them one of three things. So they randomized them into three. They either told them the truth is that this is how many steps you're actually getting. And they got the truth. They told them an inflated number. So let's say you did 10,000 steps. They would tell you you did 12,000. And then they told them a deflated number. So if you did 10,000, they would tell you that you did like 7 or 8,000 or something, right? When in fact, nothing had changed. These people were taking the same amount of steps. They were just being told something different. The group that was told that they had a deflated number started to not only feel really bad about themselves, so they tested kind of like their mental health after this 4 weeks of being told that you're not doing enough. And They actually saw changes in blood pressure, which is going to be an indicator of stress. And here was the really interesting part. This part kind of like blows my mind. These were all regular, avid exercisers. They believed that exercise was really helpful for them. Everything else in their life started to go off the rails. So they started eating more junk food. They started eating less vegetables. They started drinking more alcohol. So within 4 weeks, there was kind of this like fuck it mentality with these group of people because they were being told something that was not kind of up to their standard in their brain. I do 10,000 steps a day. Well, like, what do you mean I only got 7,000 today? Like that's not who I am. That's not what I do. And even though they were actually taking those 10,000 steps a day, the fact that they were being sort of like messed with and told that you weren't doing enough completely derailed their behavior and also metrics of their physiology.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
Where when I come back to like protocols and exercise and muscle, like I can tell you how to increase your muscle size. I can tell you how to increase your VO2 max. I can tell you how to improve your strength and power. But it's going to be really individual person to person based upon your goals. And so if you're listening to somebody who's got a goal of increasing their strength and power, and that's not your goal, and that's not intuitively working for you, you're not going to stick with it. And if you don't stick with it, who the fuck cares? Like, it's not going to work for the long term because you're going to end up in this vicious cycle of like, oh, I can't do it. It's not happening for me. So F it. Like, I'm just going to like not do anything. And that happens often, as pointed out by this literature, which is really fascinating. I'll take this one step further with wearables. I have a couple of clients that I work with from a nutrition standpoint. And one of my clients just recently upgraded her device. I'm not going to tell you which device it is, except it's a strap that you wear around your wrist.
Okay.
And in this device upgrade, it was not only the actual physical device, but also a software upgrade. This woman is a meticulous, she was a finance person, right? She's just like meticulous about her health and it suits her. Like she's just like, I just need to track stuff. Like it's really, it soothes her brain to see at the end of the day, like I've checked all the boxes. She would never be one of these people that I could be like, hey, yeah, eat your fruits and vegetables.
Right.
So for her, her intuition is like, I need to see the numbers. So she gets her new device and she doesn't say anything to me for probably like a week or two. And she goes, I need to talk to you about something in one of our sessions. And I was like, what? And she's like, I think I've been overeating. And I was like, ooh. I was like, I'm looking at all of your data. Like it hasn't changed. Like literally nothing has changed. She's one of these people that like wash, rinse, repeat. She kind of eats the same thing all the time. I was like, I don't really understand what you're saying. And she's like, well, my device is telling me that I am now eating or that I shouldn't be eating 250 calories, that my like calorie requirement has gone down by 250 calories. And I said, what? I was like, your body composition is the same. Your activity is the same. Like your training is going really well. Well, I don't really understand. And she showed me her app and I can send you this screenshot. It was like solid, 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 solid. And then the second she got her new device, 250 calories lower. And so she's losing her mind because she's like, which is true? Like, was the old number true that like I had this requirement and I was eating this number of calories, or is the new number true? And this goes back to Ali Crump's study where it's like, they've been like messing with your brain by not giving you the actual correct number. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know which one is true. But what I do know is that everything that you are doing has been perfectly consistent for the past 8 weeks, despite the fact that this device has just told you something that's like rocked your world. If I look at what you're putting in your mouth, perfect. If I look at your training, those two things are paired together. You're hitting, new numbers and you're reaching your goals and all these things. But because this number was off and she's a number person, she was basically like, none of these other things matter. And I was like, whoa, we need to have an intervention. Please take that thing off your wrist, right? Like these other spreadsheets that you're putting together of your own body that you know to be true, that are not manipulated by some third-party software, are actually what matters and are actually what are bringing you to your goals. And she has the device on still. But it drives her crazy daily because she's just like, I just don't know. And I'm like, can you take it off? And she's like, no, I really need it. I really need it.
I mean, which is its own thing, right? The fact that that she can't take it off, that we can't take our devices off
Yep.
because God forbid we listen to our bodies or just kind of go by feeling.
Yep.
Even when you eat, like your body knows when you feel full, when you feel overfull, when you haven't eaten enough, when you eat something that makes you feel like crap, when you eat something that makes you feel energized. Like
Mhm.
we do get the feedback and the information without the device if we want to hear it.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we have
Go,
another three
Mark.
hours. I'm
What are you
hoping we
thinking,
have another
Mark?
3 hours. I really do. Um, like there's just so much that is firing for me. So I'm gonna pivot to my work life for a minute. So um, even though most of my life has been paying attention to data around like customer acquisition and customer retention and what drives loyalty and all this kind of stuff, the thing that I absolutely believe is that data matters. It will always matter, but sometimes emotions matter more. Right? When we think about things that keep people committed, right, and loyal and on the path and more healthy, whether it's in an organization or in life, you need to have some type of emotional resonance, right? There needs to be something that keeps you absolutely connected to the overall, to the overall solve. And I think the thing that you do immensely well, and for everyone listening, the thing I would also just ask you all to do is, it's almost like we need to go back to first principles, right? Right, because I think if everyone can just understand that there are just some foundational truths that maybe shift over time, but generally really don't shift. And then there are elements on top of those first principles where you can apply some of your own DNA, so to speak. I almost think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You need to have shelter, you need to have food. And then beyond that, right, it becomes a little bit different, right? Like there's these foundational things. And when I think about wellness, think about just there are foundational truths out there that people need to pay attention to. And then as we know more and there's more information and more correlation, you need to pay attention to it. You need to understand what that means and then understand what that means for you. And then you need to have your own like internal clock. Like, how does this make me feel? And yeah, like chocolate in the moment makes me feel really, really good. But chocolate, like, 8 hours a day, it's probably not going to make me feel like that's something both intuitive and something you can actually hypothesize and have like an outcome around. Like to me, I think that's the real takeaway. I mean, you make so much sense, but you draw so many connections. And I just hope people take pause and take it all in and become their own scientists, so to speak, right? And apply some critical thought to all the information out there to where it's coming from and why it's tipping. Like if you see a lot of information coming from people who are selling a new supplement, like maybe you need to question that a little bit, right? If you have a lot of people who are, lighting up on podcasts because they're talking about the new best wellness trend, maybe you need to question a little bit. And then there are people like yourself who have always been about the science. Um, and I think that's what I just hope more people really, right, dive back into. So
Yeah.
not a question, an observation, but yeah,
We
just
just
a lot.
love you, obviously. That's all. That's all.
Well,
No
I
big
also
deal.
I so appreciate the alignment between sectors. I think that's really a great way to think about a lot of this is that there are foundational truths. There are big levers. There is in science we would call it large effect size, right? So if I was to line up all kinds of interventions that you could do, the big levers are going to have a large effect on your body. So, for example, if I wanted to improve your metabolism, let's say I wanted to lower your A1C over a period of time, I would say start eating more fruits and vegetables and lean protein and stop eating so much sugar and highly processed food, right? And that is going to make a very dramatic difference on your A1C and your fasting blood glucose. I could also add in a little bit of exercise there, right? That's also going to have a large effect size. We're going to see a dramatic change in that actual number. Then you look at other things like supplements, right? Which I'm a supplement researcher. I am not anti supplement, but that lever is going to be very tiny. The effect size is going to be so much smaller. And one of the principles that kind of guides me in this space is this idea of don't major in the minors, because in the wellness space, it's so easy to see those little tiny levers and think, oh, that's the thing that's going to be, the movement that I'm looking for, when in reality, it's probably going to move the needle, but just a tiny bit. Whereas these big foundational things, whether in wellness or Mark in business, if you don't have those things dialed in, I don't care how many tiny levers that you pull, they are not going to have a long-term effect. You might see tiny bumps here or there, but you're not going to see a shift in the organization, in your body.
Yep.
And so with these big levers, whether, again, you're thinking about exercise, nutrition, sleep, stress reduction, or please forgive me, I don't speak business, but the foundational pieces that you are seeing in your work, that overall principle holds true, because if you don't get the simple things right, then the more complicated, like 1% kind of stuff isn't going to matter. It's like a drop in the ocean. And I would take it a step further to say, I'm excited that people are talking about all of these things right now, because I think what we've been missing is a conversation about the foundational pieces. Like, we actually don't know as a society what these foundational pieces are, because we were never really taught that these are the 5 big levers that you have. Right now, what we're getting is a deluge of teeny tiny factoids that are kind of like part of that silo, right? Where we'll take it back to exercise. Like, should you do zone 1 or zone 2? Should you do HIIT? Should you do sit? Does Pilates work? These kinds of things. Those are all within that bucket, right? But we never learned the actual bucket first. We never realized hey, there's a bucket here. What we're actually seeing is a bunch of shiny objects and things that spin without recognizing that they are part of a larger theme. And that's the part that I think people could really benefit from, but also is challenging in our world, because we have no appreciation for the 10,000 foot picture or the 30,000 foot picture. What we want to know is, how many grams per kilo of protein do I need? And I could say, you need 1.2 grams per kilo, person. And they would be like, that's great. And then I say, do you know what a gram per kilo looks like of protein? And they're like, I don't even know what a gram or kilo is. I can't do that. We do not work in that system here in the United States. I don't even know what that means. Right. And so I'm giving them information, but it's not even actionable, because it doesn't make any sense in the context of, hey, how about eat some fruits and vegetables and some lean protein, whether it's chicken or a soybean, and you're going to be good. Right. But people want that nitty gritty, because that's where we consume information.
Yeah. So as we start to sort of wind this down, which feels so unfortunate, but I would be remiss if I did not ask about a couple of things. One, especially since you are Chief Science Officer at Restore, I have to ask about heat and cold. I also have to ask about GLP-1s and peptides. And I feel very much like these are emotional debates within not so much like the heat and cold, but certainly GLPs and peptides are very emotional in the space, right? And obviously it's obvious why. And then heat and cold has become so trendy. And I'm still trying to figure out where I fit in the thing. So I would also just love to know, what's the deal? Why should I care? Should I care? Yeah.
All right, let's start with heat and cold, because that's a little bit less loaded. So heat and cold are great for your body. I think there is a physiologic principle that we have in biology that is called hormesis. And hormesis means just a little bit of stress, not too much and not too little.
Okay.
And what that does is it causes adaptation over time. So I'll bring it back to exercise as just a primer. If you exercise one time, you're going to have some structural changes in your muscle. You'll have a little bit of inflammation. You might be a little bit sore. But if you never do it again, your muscle is not going to change. But if you stress your muscle out just a little, not too much, day after day after day after day, that's when you're going to start to see that muscle get bigger. It becomes much more metabolically active. We can go down the rabbit hole of mitochondrial health and all of these things, right? And so this idea of hormesis is that you stress your body out just a little bit, not too much, continuously, and you will start to see adaptations in your body. And so that's how heat and cold both work. And I will also offer that there is about this much data on both of them. And if you're listening to the podcast, that was a very small span between my thumb and my fingertip. And this is where we get into all these arguments about, should women cold plunge? Is it not good for them? How hot do I need to be? What's the dose? So I'll give you a really good example. I started at Restore. And if you don't know Restore, it is the largest interventional wellness company in the United States. We have 260 some odd locations. We do therapies like sauna, cryotherapy, compression, red light. And there's a lot of really cool scientists working in this space. If you were to talk to me 3, 4, 5 years ago, I would have been like, what the hell is that? Like, come on. But I've actually growing and being curious and asking good questions of my colleagues. There's a lot of good science happening in this space. There's just a little bit of it right now, which is why I get a little bit like twitchy over a lot of the headlines and the claims that are being made. But if you think, for example, about cold, right? So my medium that I have is I've got cryotherapy machines, but you could probably apply this to cold plunge as well. Is we have this huge claim out there that cold therapy is going to improve inflammation over time, right? That's one of the major things. It's going to reduce your inflammation, which is going to be helpful for the progression of the diseases of our time. So when I got to Restore, I was like, okay, that's interesting. I've been working in exercise for a long time. We do use cold therapies for recovery and for help. And I'm going to loop back to that in just a second. How often do you need to cold plunge or cryotherapy in order to see this inflammatory effect, anti-inflammatory effect? And my system was like, I don't know. I was like, has anybody ever done that study before? Because we're telling people to come in 2 or 3 times a week and we're saying that that's going to be beneficial. Like, is that based on any data? And so I started digging around and I realized there's probably 10 or 12 studies out there that have shown inflammation improves with consistent use of specifically cryotherapy, but every protocol was different, right? It was like, this one's in older men with obesity. This one's in, young women that are trying to sleep better. This one's in, folks that have a clinical diagnosis, and every single one was different. This person does it once a week. This person does it twice a week. This person does 3 times a week. And so it was really hard to generalize based upon this literature for the sort of like Gen Pop wellness population. How often should you be coming to do cryotherapy? So I looked at the data, which we had 10 years worth of data on people that have been coming to the studios. We looked retrospectively for 6 months and we figured out, not complicated, that in order to see an inflection point of chronic inflammation improving, it was about 6 times a month, and it took about 3 months before you saw the effect. Okay. Voila, we have some data, right? Is it the end of the story? I don't know. There's probably like variations or, like it's going to work differently for one population versus another. But at least we have a baseline there, right? So it's okay, 6 times a week. That's like 1 or 2 times, 6 times a month. So 1 or 2 times a week. Keep an eye on it. It's going to take 3 months because that's typically how long your body takes to change. And then the second question, which if you're in exercise, hey, if you make yourself really cold after you exercise, that's probably not a good idea because hormesis, we want to stress our bodies out just a little bit, not too much. And if we blunt the response to that stress, which is what cold does to exercising muscles, what you actually see is impairments of the gains that you might have otherwise had, because essentially you've stopped the signal, the inflammatory signal from the muscle to the immune system, and you don't actually get that repair and regeneration. So the next study that we're looking at now is how far away from exercise should you be doing cold therapy to have this chronic inflammation go down, but not blunt your acute inflammation, which we actually want. So that I use those as 2 examples to say, yes, cold is probably great, right? Also pretty great for your mental health, like invigorating. You get in there, you have to deep breathe you're listening to your favorite song. Cold plunge is probably working really similarly. But the data is like, if we're thinking about getting down the rabbit hole, like, how often do I need to do it? How cold does my skin need to get? How, like, what biomarkers should I be paying attention? These kind of, we don't know. We don't know. We don't have that data. And anybody out there that's like claiming that they do is absolutely making it up. Like 100% making it up based on anecdote, based upon some kind of like commercial venture that they're putting out there. We don't have that data. We also don't have really good data that compares cold therapies to one another. So we know that cryotherapy, for example, works differently than cold plunge. Cryo works on your skin. It doesn't cool your core temperature. It has this really interesting autonomic nervous system response, which is probably why it's good for pain. Still digging into that. Cold plunge makes you really cold. You have this massive vasoconstriction effect, and it has a pressure effect on your system. So that's working really differently than cryotherapy. So there are shades of gray even within these, like hot or cold. What should I do? Flip to the other side of the temperature scale here. If we look at heat, there are really good data actually to show that heat can be super beneficial. It does a lot of the same things that exercise does. In fact, we call it an exercise mimetic. So it increases core temperature, it increases your blood pressure, it makes you sweat, it activates heat shock proteins, which are sort of helpful for long-term hormetic effects. So we know that heat is good, and the majority of the data is in Finnish and Scandinavian countries, Finnish sauna, right? And what we see, this is population-based data. It shows that if you get hot, then you have improvements in mental health, improvements in cardiovascular health, like all the things that exercise does, right? Cool. Then the question is, what's the dose? Well, we have this population association data that says 1 session a week is good, 2 is better, 3 is better, 4 is better, 5 is better. Daily is probably the best thing. And then the question becomes, how long should I stay in the sauna? We don't know. Don't know.
Okay.
No idea. How hot should I get? I don't know. Probably not too hot, because if you get too hot, it starts to do brain damage, right? Like that's a problem. But vice versa, if you get into cold, like if you're inducing hypothermia and you're giving yourself frostbite, also a problem, right?
Yeah.
So this is the question. So then people that are asking, well, should I do Finnish sauna or should I do infrared sauna, right? So infrared is what we have at Restore. These two have never been put head to head, so we don't really know. Infrared sauna works really differently than a Finnish sauna. So if you've ever been in like a barrel sauna, it's like that wood thing you get in, it's super hot inside. It basically heats you from the outside in. Infrared sauna works on a really specific wavelength of light. It's somewhere around 1,000 to 1,400 nanometers of light. It penetrates deep into your body and actually heats you from the inside out. The wavelength of light actually heats you. So the ambient temperature is actually not that warm. And what we're kind of realizing is like, hot is hot is hot. As long as you heat your body up, that's probably the thing that you need to do. And it's interesting in clinical trials. So this is the randomized control trial. Unlike the Finnish sauna data, they actually use a machine called a Heckel machine. It's a clinical grade infrared sauna. So if you look at hospital data or lab-based data, they use an infrared sauna and they show improvements, again, in cardiovascular disease, in mental health. We have we have a really cool study that we're doing with Mass General Brigham. Restore Labs is doing it with Mass General to look at sauna use and mild and moderate depression improvements. So if you're in the Boston area, check it out, because you could enroll if you have a diagnosis of moderate or mild depression. And so the answer, like everybody wants to know, like, okay, then how often do I need to get an infrared sauna? Like, how hot should I be? What's the thing? I don't know. Nobody knows. Like so when you see these protocols, right? Like I see them all the time and I'm just like rolling my eyes. I'm like, how the hell do you know that? Like that data literally does not exist. What we know is that getting hot is probably good for you. Getting hot regularly is probably pretty good for you. Getting too hot is not good for you. Hormesis, just enough stress, not too much, not too little. And so this is the part that like I kind of laugh about, is people are like, oh, like this influencer said that I need to get into the sauna because blah, blah, blah. I'll give you another really funny example and then we can move on to peptides. So there was this one headline that came out a couple of years ago now, and I was making all of the like very high, like top shelf podcast talking points for a while, where they basically showed they took a bunch of young men And they showed that their growth hormone improved by 16 times or something like that when they started going into the sauna. And because I'm a jerk and I actually know how to read science, I go and I
Sure.
found the actual study, and it was super fascinating. It was, first of all, in a bunch of, 18 to 24 or so year old young men, very healthy young men. And in this group, we see rapid increases in growth hormone just because that's the stage of life that they're in. And so what they showed was that indeed, after a sauna session, one sauna session, their growth hormone increased by 16 times. Oh, interesting. That's cool. Here's the thing. The intervention was, I can't remember if it was 4 weeks or 12 weeks. It was a long, long intervention. And what they had them to do was go into the sauna every day for 30 to 40 minutes. And they were sauna naive, which means that they were not sauna users before they got into the sauna. Have you ever been in a sauna before?
Yeah.
How does it feel after you've been in there for a while?
Terrible.
Yeah, it's very stressful, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh,
30 minutes,
I'm
30 to 40 is a lot of time in there.
long time. It's a
Yep.
long time in a
Yep.
sauna. And this
Yep.
was the Finnish sauna type. So this was the like heat from the outside in, which tends to be even
Hot.
more sort of like agitating for people. And so what they found was that if you actually go and dig into the data, literally like table number 2, if you go look at it, then what you can see is by the third time, fourth time they had gotten to the sauna, that growth hormone surge completely leveled out. They were right back
Wow.
to baseline. Why is that? Because stress induces growth
Mm.
hormone. So they were acclimating to this heat stress over 3 or 4 times. And so, yes, in the initial phase of, I don't know this therapy, it's making me feel really uncomfortable. I don't know what I'm going to feel like as I'm walking into this chamber. Growth hormone surged
Yeah.
because that's what it does. After 3 or 4 sessions, it was absolutely back to baseline because this person
Wow.
was acclimated both from a heat sense as well as from a stress sense. And yet, this myth will not die. If you go and Google it right now, you will find many of the biohacker types that are saying, I get in the sauna because it's going to improve my growth hormone by 16 times.
So we'll get on stage talking to 2,000 people if you've never gotten on stage before, right? It's
Yeah,
the same
exactly. That's
thing,
exactly right. Same
right?
thing.
Basically.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah.
Exercise every time you do it induces growth hormone because
Wow.
that's what you need
Wow.
to improve your muscle health.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you for that.
even headlines that we see are like, even if they're not based on a lot of truth, and I'll come back to the foundational principles here. Heat and cold seem to be really good for you within, certain parameters, not too much, not too little. They seem to be quite helpful for inflammation, for mental health, for cardiovascular outcomes. The like exact protocols are yet to be defined right now. And
Right.
a lot of the claims that sound really like hot and sexy are kind of not really based in the reality of the data at this point. So, got to
Wow.
be careful out there. And that
Wow.
brings me to GLP-1s and peptides. I'm going to start with a simple statement. A GLP-1 is a peptide, right?
Okay.
So, what
Okay.
are peptides? Peptides are small proteins, right? So, proteins are made up of amino acids. They're the little building blocks that make proteins. Peptides are like 40 or less typically,
Okay.
right? And so these are little molecules that your body makes very naturally in many cases. So if you think about a GLP-1, this is a molecule that is made in your GI tract. Naturally, when you eat food, it's a peptide. It travels to your brain. It tells you I'm full. It travels to your pancreas. It tells you to secrete insulin. And so this is why it has been used for, I don't know, like 20, 30 years now for people that have type 2 diabetes. So Ozempic or semaglutide, which is the pharmaceutical name of the first GLP-1, has been used forever and ever and ever for people that have type 2 diabetes to help regulate their sugar. And a really interesting side effect was that people lost weight. And so they noticed this for 10, 20, 15 years, and they started reaching out to the FDA and said, hey, I think that there's another indication here, which is weight loss. And the FDA approved it. I think it was like 2017 or 2018 and said, yes, Ozempic is used for type 2 diabetes. And then they had Wegovy, which was the one that was used for weight loss. It's exactly the same peptide.
Wow.
Exactly the same peptide. It's like buying a Camry and like you buy a white Camry or a red Camry, like it's still exactly the same car. It's just packaged different.
Mhm.
That's exactly what these, whether it's an indication for type 2 diabetes or an indication for weight loss. And
Okay.
so That's a peptide. And so the interesting thing about this is that we are recognizing that these peptides could potentially be quite powerful, right? So they can
Okay.
actually have pretty profound effects on physiology, small, tiny doses that have a really short half life when they live in your body. And then we can sort of scientifically manipulate them and help with blood sugar regulation or help with weight loss. The semaglutides, as well as the sort of like second and third generation tirzepatide, is another one. They've added a second peptide to it called the GIP. There's a new one coming out. It's called retatrutide. That one is going to be a GLP, a GIP, and glucagon, which is another really interesting peptide that your body makes naturally. Your body makes all of these peptides naturally. When you put them in pharmaceutical grade, you can take them once a week. They have a really long shelf life, and they kind of act for that entire 7 days on your body. So when we're kind of like translating that into the wellness peptides, this is the big question mark, right? Is what are these peptides? What are their commercial utility? Which is, I think a lot of people are like, how can we sell this, right? In the world that I live in. And if we're going to sell it, what marketing claims can we make? And right now, the problem is if you actually go and look at these peptides, whether it's something that's really, prolific, BPC 157 or kisspeptin, oxytocin, or some of the other ones that are being promoted for women. There's very, very, very little data in the way that they are being kind of marketed to the general population, right? BPC 157, really popular, is, again, you make it in your body. It is actually made in your stomach, which is pretty interesting. And it has been used anecdotally to sort of like inject into places that are injured or you've had surgery or something like that. There are some early studies that show that this works. And then the problem with most of the peptides is that they were taken off of the market several years ago. The FDA decided there wasn't enough data, there wasn't enough safety data. And so they said the pharmacies can't compound them anymore. And so essentially they're like kind of like shadow banned in the United States. They're not banned, but the rule right now is that you can't make them. So you can't study them either, which is the
Okay.
problem. So right now, we're kind of in this like really weird regulatory gray zone where they could potentially be doing some really interesting things in the body. But because we don't have access to them either as consumers or as researchers, we don't have the ability to do the clinical trials to really understand what's the dose, what's the safety profile, what should they actually be used for, what is the clinical outcome of interest, and is it actually having an impact? And so I have to say, I'm pretty bullish on peptides, to be completely honest. I just think right now we don't know nearly enough about them to start really thinking about how to use them strategically. There are some that are interesting that kind of fall into this non-gray regulatory zone. So you've probably heard of tesamorelin or sermorelin. They were actually approved for stunting for children way back in the day, like 30, 40 years ago. And they were kind of like orphaned because there were other drugs that they developed that just worked better. And so people are like, oh, we don't need that. So now, so it's a growth hormone secretagogue. That's what this does. It increases your growth hormone. The claim is that it increases it within a physiologic dose so that you're not giving yourself cancer by increasing your growth hormone too much. But it's never really been tested in adults, in older adults, in middle-aged adults that are the people that are using it now. And so we have a clinical indication for a really specific disease, and they're kind of being used off label for these other populations. And that's a whole category that's kind of interesting. They're becoming commercially available. I would argue that they're probably safe if they were used in kids, but we just don't know. We don't have that data. There are others that are orals that are coming about that are pretty interesting. So I'm actually on an advisory board for a company called Heliox. They are developing an oral called PEP19. This is one that interestingly, the reason I said yes to this is it works on your endocannabinoid system. So you might remember I used to study CBD back in the day.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is
Oh my
cool.
God.
Yeah. And so
Okay.
it works on your endocannabinoid system. And essentially what it does is that it increases the metabolism of brown fat, essentially. So it works on the mitochondria uncoupling proteins.
Huh.
And so it increases your ability to burn calories efficiently and effectively. It has some really interesting outcomes. There's a huge group in Brazil that's doing a bunch of research on this. They've been doing research on it for like 20 years, to show that it can be really helpful for type 2 diabetes, for visceral fat, which is really interesting. So that's PEP19, and there are a bunch of other ones that are kind of like in this oral space. And the reason why I bring up the oral space is that that's not regulated in the same way that the injectables are, which is all the other ones that I've talked about. So you can get the orals. Some have really good data, like PEP19. Some of them, who knows what's going on out there. And so, yeah, it's a wild west right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
So like these the people who are ordering peptides, quote unquote, online, or the sort of wellness places, like I'm immediately thinking of Remedy Place that's like, we now have peptides available and like the founder has tested them and everything is fine. Like we should pause is kind of
Yes.
the advice on that,
Yes.
because there's not enough data. And then as it pertains to weight loss drugs, do you think we just care way too much about who's taking what for what reason? Should people just do what helps them feel good and feel good about how they feel in their bodies and what they look at in the mirror? Or I'm being careful because I know this is so emotional, and for the people who are not taking it, it's like it's emotional for a different reason, right? Like it's a matter of like you're cheating because you're injecting something, and I'm over here doing these like big foundational things trying to get the same result that you're getting, and now we're no longer speaking to each other over an injectable drug.
Mm-hmm.
And
And I
so
think,
like what do we do with that?
yeah, that's going to, I think, start to become the narrative of a lot of these kind of like advanced wellness
Mm,
therapeutics, whether it's pharmaceutical grade, like a GLP-1, which are now available in retail locations like ours. Like you can buy GLP-1s on, you see it advertised all the time. Like you can get it from a
yeah.
telehealth company. So I'm going to come back to your first question about should we be careful about peptides? And the answer there is yes, absolutely. And the answer is yes for two reasons. One, we are lacking in data. So that's important. And the other is supply chain right now. And so
Mm,
when we look at the supply of where these different peptides are coming from, as I mentioned, there's some that are clinically indicated that you can make in the United States, and most of them are being made in compounding pharmacies. For the most part, if you buy them from a reputable compounding pharmacy in the United States, they're safe, right? The majority of these other ones that I was talking about that are kind of on this banned list, this shadow ban list, if you will, they are being imported into the United States from God only knows where, right? So the majority of them are being imported from, much like the supplement industry, China and India. And what the problem with that is that they are not really traceable, because essentially what they do is they come in not as a pharmaceutical, not as a supplement. They're just kind of like shipped in flats, or they're being made in what's called a research grade laboratory in the United States. So right now, if you wanted to go and get some peptides, you wanted to go get some BPC 157, you go on to Dr. Google and you type it in and you can get it. And the vial, if you look at the picture of the vial, will say for research purposes only,
Hmm.
not for human consumption. And that's how they become available on the internet. And
Wow.
then if you wanted to buy them, you would say there's a checkbox, like the I'm not a robot checkbox, except this one says, yes, I am a professional that is using this in my research, and no, I am not injecting it into humans. And essentially, that's just kind of a regulatory loophole that right now nobody has the bandwidth to go after, because these companies are just kind of like popping up all over the place. So I would say there are two buckets of peptides right now to pay attention to. The one are the ones that you can get. The supply chain is pretty solid. I don't know anything about the Remedy Place and what they're offering, but there are a handful that you can get right now that are well supplied. They're safe. They are coming from reputable sources. And then there's this whole wild west. And what I think the big problem is for people is they don't really understand which bucket their peptide lives in right now. So that is kind of
right.
like, it's just becoming this huge mess. I am getting word that this is probably going to change from the current administration, which, without getting into politics, it seems to be that they are going to loosen these regulations up, which should help with the like research side from my perspective. It's going to make
Okay.
it a really fascinating commercial space where there's going
Right.
to be a lot of these peptides that are being offered with a lot of claims that are being made. It's going to be kind of a nightmare for the FTC, which is the like marketing regulatory arm. But they're coming, I would imagine. So keep an eye out for that. And then it kind of dovetails into your second question asked, which is like, who should be taking these? Who should have access? Should we be gatekeeping? Should we be judging? Is there like a moral component here? And if I stick with GLP-1s just for right now and forget about the other peptides, what I would say is a GLP-1 is a very powerful and potent little peptide. And I think it should be a tool in the toolbox for a variety of different things. So we were just talking a second ago about how they're indicated for type 2 diabetes as well as for weight loss. They are now being re-released with FDA indications for sleep apnea, for renal disease, for arthritis. They're looking at them for long COVID. So these are being studied in really interesting ways. This not only are they great for metabolism and subsequent weight loss, we're also seeing they're very powerful anti-inflammatories for these diseases that we might have. And so what I would say is at this very moment, we are kind of blinded by the fact that people are using them for weight loss. And I think that's really short-sighted. They are a very powerful tool in the toolbox for a lot of other indications that are kind of coming down. And I would say keep an eye on that evidence and reserve the judgment as we start to think about all the other things that this little potent peptide could be used for.
Love that.
Amen. Thank
Love
you for
that.
that.
Yeah.
I doesn't get much better than that, in my opinion. Any
Well,
final
it kind of goes to this idea that we were talking about with like intuition and listening to your body. Like some person
Yes.
might say, I don't want to inject myself once a week. I would rather do exercise and nutrition, even if it doesn't lose me the 20% that the GLP-1s, that's the choice that I'm making for me and for my body. And vice versa. Somebody might say, I have been dieting and exercising my entire life. My blood pressure
Yes.
is sky high. My triglycerides are sky high. And I feel like I've been pulling these levers and it's just not working. And this is the tool for them. And so I would say just be empathetic and kind as people choose whatever pathway, whatever journey for their own body, knowing that this toothpaste is out of the tube at this point, and this is now an option for people and it's not going away.
I think
Right.
the really cool thing about the point you just made as well is my suspicion would be that for some people, this becomes the catalyst to lean into everything else, right? If all of a sudden I can feel better about who I am and I can discover a whole new world,
Yes.
right? That's got to be great.
And that is interestingly where the literature is going right now, is that people will say, I wasn't able to move before. It just really hurt. Or, in the cases of arthritis or some of these other diseases and disorders, like it was literally keeping people from being able to pull these levers. And so now this is the
Wow.
gateway for them to be able to
Love
actually
that.
act.
Love
So
it. Love it.
I think, yeah, that's the right mentality for sure, is let this be a tool in the toolbox for people that want to choose to use it and reserve judgment because they get to be the expert of their own body. It's
Any
funny how it all
final
comes full
thoughts?
circle, right?
I know. I
Yes.
know. It's so
Yes.
perfect.
Yes.
I like the whole episode is kind of like fuck your protocol slash listen to your body slash foundational big levers. Like that is it is almost like the conversation. Granted, we could talk to you about so many things over the course of literally a 24-hour podcast, but like a lot of things we talked about fall into those buckets. And I hope that that's what people hear, which ultimately one part of your brain could be, oh shit, she didn't tell me what to do. And the other part, you can be really empowered to just try some things and see how you feel and either keep doing them or stop doing them. And it's just that simple.
But
I
I think
love
that's the thing, right? Like that is what to do. Like
That
I
is what
think
you
that
do.
is the prescription,
Be
right?
your own scientist.
Right.
I call them tiny experiments that people do with themselves. Is if you want to try something new, do a tiny experiment. Do it for 30 days and see if it sticks. And if you like it and it's working for your body and it's kind of like within that big bucket, great. Like you found something that you can do sustainably for the rest of your life, because that's the most important part, is finding those things that are actually going to be the behaviors that you return to over and over and over again. Think about exercise, is that you wouldn't go to the gym just one time and expect that your body is going to be completely transformed.
Yep.
These behaviors, these strategies, whether it's, hot and cold, or, using a peptide or whatever, these are things that you're going to be able to rely on for the long term. So do some tiny experiments and be your own scientist, see what works for your body, and then go from there. And don't get, sidelined. Think back to that Apple Watch study that was, I'm not doing enough, right? I'm not doing the right things, because that in and of itself is going to derail you. So as long as you're operating within these foundational silos, within these verticals, see what I did there with that business term, Mark?
You
As long as
did it.
if you're operating here in these foundational verticals, you're doing it right. Like you're doing it right. So give yourself a break and find the things that works in your day to day, and do some tiny experiments. See what works for you and for your body.
I love it.
Doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be expensive.
Which is like literally part of what you said on our first podcast together. Like we're making it too hard. And 5 years later, you're saying we're making it too hard.
Yeah, totally. And I think that I'll just land the plane here, is that if you are feeling really overwhelmed by these external cues, headlines, whatever, turn them off. Like, go back to analog, right?
Yeah.
Because if they're driving you crazy and you feel guilty, or they're giving you like negative feedback, then that's also a tiny experiment. Like that's not working for you. And so find the things, the support systems, the channels, the people to follow that are actually going to encourage the positive behaviors. And don't worry about the stuff that like you're not doing, because it doesn't really matter if it's not working for you anyways. I use a phrase all the time in my life: be for things, not against them. You will rarely find me saying things like, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, because it's not actionable, right? I try to give people advice to be like, this is what you can do, right? This is enabling, this is empowering. And if something feels not enabling or empowering, and it's within those foundational buckets, like get rid of it, because that's like the Apple Watches and Ali Crumb's study. It's just going to induce this vicious cycle. So be really careful of that.
Thank you.
I love this.
I know you landed the plane, but we're going to like hold on the tarmac just so you could tell people where to find you, how to support you, all of the things.
Awesome. You can find me on the socials at Rachele Pojednic. So it's just my first and last name, rachelepojednic.com. And I do all this kind of social media science communication as best I can. I like to say that scientists suck at social media. I'm hoping to buck the trend here. But would love to have this conversation. My DMs are always open. And just, if you have questions or you're looking for a little bit of positivity, would love to continue the conversation.
Thank you.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you both for your amazing questions, and also for offering a platform for a little bit of sanity here.
Oh my God. Like, if this podcast went nowhere, like I feel fulfilled. Like we could just like
Same.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, everybody. We will catch you next time.
Thank you, Al.